Hey folks, as we are getting ready to head into drafting this next in timed right in earnest, I've had some requests just to take a look at some thoughts on concluding paragraphs or concluding ideas, regardless of whether it's timed right or a process paper. So I have a slideshow attached in the assignment as well as this screencast in the hopes that it may help give you some time or some perspective as you are looking at how conclusions might impact or be impactful in terms of your timed right. So, a couple of things to remember, regardless of whether or not it's a timed right or the length, because remember, whether you write a 1.5 page timed right for a class or an AP test where you have, an 80-page thesis or a 100-page research paper, the conclusion and the intro should not be the longest parts of the writing. That's the bigger piece. One of the things that is a little bit of a red flag for a reader is when the introduction is sizably longer than the body paragraphs themselves. So bear that in mind, regardless of timing, or length. What you do want to be aware of as it relates to a timed right is, especially for, like I said, the timed right, the thing that a grader, a reader, your professor will see is if there actually is a physical separate conclusion. Because what that suggests to a reader is that you have taken the time to plan, whether it's the hand turkey or a graphic organizer or a series of bullet points, but that you have organized your thoughts and that you have paced yourself so that you actually have time to write a conclusion. Let me X that out because I already took my symptom test. So again, bear in mind that if you do have a formal conclusion, that does speak to your level of organization and potentially sophistication on an AP exam or a timed right, which is a little bit different than a push. Yeah, it's a little bit different than a push. If you run out of a time on a timed right, which happens for several people, it is really more important to have the really strongly developed body paragraphs. And we've said that before in class. If you do not have a formal conclusion, that is not a deal breaker. Remember, as long as you have some kind of way that you have brought your essay to closure, even if it is one or two sentences at the end of your body paragraph, you are going to be okay in a timed right situation, because a reader who is reading your essay all of the way through, and they will see that maybe your last two sentences of your last body paragraph does restate your thesis or does refer back to your thesis and does connect to a deeper construct. They will acknowledge that when they go through the scoring. So the important point is, if you don't have time for a formal conclusion in a timed right, make sure you save and come to one or two sentences of some kind of closure in that last body paragraph. The quickest way to do that, honestly, is to look at the line of reasoning that you are developing in whatever that last body paragraph and close read are, and then refer it back to your thesis and refer it back to the bigger construct. In a formal conclusion, you may have more time to flesh out the commentary, but as long as you are coming to some kind of reference and brief closure to it in the last body paragraph, you're going to be okay, at least by AP standards and by a timed right standard, if I'm being honest. And that's really in part why I stress the idea of working with this 5 to 7 minute stretch of time prior to actually physically drafting the essay itself, because I do want you to really just take some time to plan out what your pacing is doing, and that you are saving a good 5 minutes at the end of this time frame to draft a really quick conclusion and to take a look to make sure that the thesis that you have at the beginning is as tight and controlled as the thesis that you have in the end. And a couple things to remember, and I didn't want to say do's and don'ts because, again, a reader is looking at your full essay. They are looking at what you're saying, what your argument is, and they're reading it with a really friendly eye. So I can give you recommendations for what I think you want to consider, and then you make the decision as the writer. But I will say you do want to restate your thesis. That does come up across the board because a thesis in your opening and a restatement of that thesis at the end does suggest, again, that organization and planning. Couple recommendations: it's most tightly controlled in that first sentence of the conclusion. That's the recommendation, is restate the thesis there. And again, for some of us, we write a stronger thesis at the end than we do at the intro because we've written ourselves into that argument. So take a moment to cross check what you write at the conclusion versus what you wrote at the beginning and see if maybe you want to switch the two out. And I know for some of you, that was one of the goals that you worked with, and it ended up working out really well for you in the last time right. The other piece that comes up is make sure you don't introduce anything new in the conclusion. No new information or no new concept that you just thought of, because you won't have time to create a sustained analysis on it if it is in your conclusion. It's going to be this kind of loosey-goosey sentence in your ending paragraph, and your reader is going to say, well, so what? You didn't flesh that out. You are just throwing it in now, and that does create, again, a little bit of a red flag. So maybe like a lighter red flag. So bear that in mind. And again, make sure that you're kind of listening and minding your academic style, whatever tonality you have started in your writing in the earlier drafts. You want to continue to match that. Some people get freaked at the end and they know they're running out of time. So all of a sudden their tone shifts and they become far more informal than they may have structured at the top of their writing. So I would just be very aware of making sure that your conclusion tonally as a writer matches what you've done in that previous writing. And also be careful with sarcasm or humor. It's good to have a little bit of humor if that's your writing style, and I wouldn't want to discourage you necessarily in that, because I do think for a lot of you, that little bit of humor or that little bit of a critical tone really does underscore your personality, your critical thinking, and so on. But I would be careful with it because it doesn't always read as well as you might have intended it to. And your readers aren't going to take the time to think about what you meant to say. They're going to look at what is, because on average, your readers, depending on their pacing, are going to score anywhere from 100 to 300 essays a day, which is an 8-hour day. And that really means that most readers are only taking 1 minute or two at the most to read any given essay. I have some readers who go through and they will score a few thousand by the time those 7 days are over. So bear in mind that they're not stopping to think about what you said. They're reading it, they're going with that first score, and then it goes to the next reader after that. So again, for those of you who are trying to figure out, okay, well, what is my pattern? What should I perhaps include, or how should I structure this? Here are a few things that I would recommend. Again, you're going to restate your thesis. And after you do that, I would suggest that you refer back to the writer and the tools that they used, because again, that's what your thesis has indicated. You guys are very comfortable now with this idea of looking at how a writer uses techniques to drive a particular interpretation. So you want to refer back to that component. And I have a little sample idea from the metamorphosis there for you to take a look at. And then the last thing you want to end there is close on how this deeper meaning carries beyond the text itself. So for instance, with the metamorphosis, if we're looking at question 3 from your previous assignment, we're talking about a burden and a gift. So, maybe our thematic idea is this notion that, at least in the metamorphosis, Gregor's transformation gives him a lovely awareness of his place in the family and his uselessness in the family. But Kafka is using that in the larger construct to kind of comment to how society, or the family in this construct, really does kind of destroy that disregard for the individual and the individual's worth. And so you want to remember that your conclusion funnels out to a more general idea by the end. However many sentences you do that in, that's up to you. A timed write is going to have fewer than a process paper, but if you can do this in 2 sentences, awesome. Generally, I think if you're working, within maybe 3 to 5 sentences, I think usually that's enough space and place for you to get to the conclusion that kind of touches on all those points. So I do hope that that helps give you a little bit of insight as you construct the next timed right. And obviously shoot me any questions, and I'm looking forward to seeing what you turn in. And I hope you have a fantastic day. Thank you.